Given that we're talking about technical memos, we're going to work through an example that is in Battery Point, a heritage precinct of the City of Hobart. You might need to have a look on a smaller scale map to see exactly where this fits if you're not familiar with Hobart, but it's a building that's currently being built, so the issues that came up were being resolved, and provides a bit more of a concrete example of the way that a planner engages with a development application. So you can see here 22 Waterloo Crescent in Battery Point, it's a heritage zone, and this is the site. 22 Waterloo Crescent was originally part of the building at the rear, so 29 Cromwell Street, that's back here. That's this amazing old building used to be the primary residence for a lot of the blocks of land around this. So it's a slightly weird shaped lot because it was subdivided in a couple of ways, and this L shape came about through a more recent development, or subdivision I should say. So it's important to know who the neighbours are. There's 26 Waterloo to the northwest, so that's here, and 20 Waterloo to the southeast. And yeah, there are various, 16 has quite a large new development in it that is some bearing on the case. So one of the first things that the planner does is, as part of the technical memo, is do a site description. So this is a really basic part of the site. So there's the front here, the street, and then the rear, and even though the rear is not very glamorous, its features such as the old veranda on the back that were very typical of the building at its time, this workers' cottage. And so these features have value in terms of recording the development of the area and how things have changed. So the planner details all of these in the technical memo, and then over the top of that presents what the proposal is. So the next slide, here's what's being proposed. So there's the old building with the veranda on the front, and then quite a substantial addition to the rear. And you can see, well, it's hard to see here, but in the planning documentation, it shows this is a 2-story part with bedrooms at the top. There's this living area in between here. So the development application is for demolition, a new 2-story rear extension, 2 bedrooms at the first floor, bath and living at the ground floor, and a deck at the top. And so because the deck is overlooking 26 Waterloo Crescent, that meant that there were quite a significant amount of issues. This is different views. You can see again here the older part, the kitchen area, the bedrooms upstairs, and here the deck. So there were privacy issues with respect to that. So then the planner goes through the planning scheme. There are 2 planning schemes in the City of Hobart. Almost everybody falls under the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. So unless you're around the docks, Sullivan's Cove area, in which case you're under the Sullivan's Cove Planning Scheme, you fall under this Interim Planning Scheme. It's a trifecta of heritage listings. So it's listed by the Tasmanian Heritage Commission. It's also in a heritage precinct. So even if it wasn't actually heritage listed, it's in that heritage precinct, and it's listed separately by the City of Hobart as well. So City of Hobart have their own heritage listing, there's the state heritage listing, there's the actual zone listing. It's part of the inner residential zone under the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. And the discretions that were invoked were private open space, privacy, building height, rear setback, and heritage. So these 5 discretions came about because the development application was not able to meet the acceptable solutions and is therefore relying on the performance criteria. So in general, the acceptable solutions set out some quite relatively easily understood solutions. So if you can fit within these solutions, so the finished surface or floor height if it's more than 1 metre above ground level, then it must have a permanently fixed screen at this height, at this transparency. So you can see numbers so that it's really clear if you're within that, your proposal is acceptable. So if everything was within the acceptable solutions, council must give you a permit. But given that there are 5 ways, including privacy, so this objective to reduce the potential for loss of privacy for dwellings, this is one of the 5 that this particular development triggered. When you look under performance criteria, you see a different way of going about things. So in this case, it starts out much the same. A balcony, deck, roof, terrace, parking space or carport that has a finished surface or floor level of more than 1 metre. And then this is where there's words that rely on the judgment of the planner to minimise overlooking. You'll see words like to not unreasonably affect. So this is where the planner's interpretation is important. And this needs to be worked through really methodically. So the planner has the planning scheme. So this is 11.4.6. The planning scheme about privacy goes through each of those and looks to see whether the acceptable solution is met. If it's not, what does the performance criteria say? So here are a couple of real basics with respect to 22 Waterloo Crescent. So it's in a residential zone and it's in a heritage precinct. So immediately the planner knows which part of the planning scheme to go to start checking off to see how the development application fits with the planning scheme. So under heritage, it's in a heritage precinct. It's listed by the City of Hobart and it's listed at the state level under the Tasmania Heritage Council's lists. So the development application needs to list some of these heritage characteristics, but it's more so the job of the planner to go through and the planner refers it to the heritage officer, and the heritage officers have the necessary expertise to evaluate the architectural details in the context of the heritage values. So we're looking here, what is the heritage significance of the place in terms of aesthetic or its history or the social meaning of the place? In this case, it's an intact workers' cottage, an Edwardian workers' cottage. And the actual history of the lot, as I mentioned earlier, is part of the development of Hobart. So Battery Point was settled very early, and the subdivision that happened in Battery Point is an important part of the development of Hobart. So the actual heritage value is in the lot and the history of the lot. What's the heritage significance of the Battery Point 1 overlay? So the building, the subdivision pattern, all are important in terms of, so this is an overlay for the area. So there's the actual place and the building, but this is the Battery Point area. So how does the building contribute to the character of the area? And as I mentioned, it's part of the subdivision pattern. So the heritage officer in this case did actually approve and recommended a permit with conditions be given. So you can see down here why the heritage officer informed the person who was managing the proposal, the planner within City of Hobart who was doing the technical memo, for his reason for his decisions, and she then incorporated that into the technical memo that went up to the decision maker. So it's because the development was at the rear, because the principal building was retained. He thought it was subservient and complementary to the principal building. And this is a judgment call because it is a really quite substantial addition. So not all heritage officers are necessarily going to agree on this point. That the materials were all the same. Basically, what was in the principal building was being replicated at the rear, so they thought the appropriate use of materials, and that the scale of proposal was acceptable. And again, different heritage officers are going to have different ideas on this, and so this is where you might end up with something in tribunal and having two heritage experts disagree. In terms of the privacy discretions, the first floor deck was the problem. So it failed to meet the acceptable solutions by 2 metres. It's a very narrow site. That was never going to happen. It overlooks the neighbouring 26 Waterloo Crescent. So in her assessment, her technical memo, the assessing officer, the project manager for this particular application, put in a condition for screening. What ended up happening is that it went to tribunal, and in here, while the developer was talking to tribunal, they actually changed the plans. So the plans that ended up going to tribunal didn't have the deck. So the condition in the tribunal reassessing this was that the condition didn't need that because the deck didn't need screening because the deck wasn't there anymore. This had implications for the window. So the window was going to overlook 26 Waterloo Crescent. It fails to meet the acceptable solution only by 20 centimetres. So I guess the developer could have chosen to move the building so that it did meet the acceptable solution, but there were a whole lot of other things going on as well. So it wasn't like they were going to be able to avoid a discretionary application. Just the mere fact that it was a heritage building meant it was going to be discretionary. The planner managing this said that nothing else needed to be done because the condition back here was going to mitigate this concern. And so when tribunal went in and removed the screening condition for the deck because there was no deck, this then meant that there was a problem with the window. So this is why the tribunal put in a condition that the window had to be just a highlight window, so 1.7 metres, so not something that a person of a kind of ordinary height could look out of. So that was all dealt with at tribunal, and a decision was made. The proponent got their permit with conditions, and in this case, the tribunal acted as the planning authority in issuing the permit. So I hope that helps illustrate the way things actually work. Thank you so much to Ben for putting this example together and coming in to class to talk. We really value your time and energy and care.